Boleh.
So, good afternoon, everyone. So, right now we're gonna talk about our main character, which is Henrietta Lex. This is the story how her cell become one of the most important medical tool in history. It also known as HeLa cell. So, who was Henrietta Lex? Henrietta Lex was a young African American woman who died of cervical cancer in 1951, while she is now a pivotal figure in medical history. For decades, she was a largely unknown, often identified incorrectly in textbooks as Helen Lane and Helen Rason. The origin of Hela cell, before her death, a surgeon removed a sample of Henrietta tumor without her knowledge or consent, which is a common practice at the time. While scientists had been trying to keep human cell alive in culture for decades with no success, Henrietta cells were different. Instead of dying, they will reproduce an entire generation every 24 hours and never stop growing. They became the first immortal human cell grown in laboratory, coded name as HeLa.
Okay, so now we move to key historical event. So in Henrietta Lacks was an African American woman born in 1920 whose life on modern medicine, despite the systemic injustice she faced during the era of racial segregation. In 1951, after being diagnosed with an aggressive form of cervical cancer, she sought treatment at Johns Hopkins Hospital, one of the few facilities at the time that accept the black patient. During her care, doctor harvested samples of her tissue without her knowledge or consent, while this was common in medical practice in the 1950s. It highlights a profound historical lack of patient autonomy and medical ethics. Sadly, Henrietta passed away later that year at the age of 31, never knowing that her cell, now known as the HeLa cell line, would become the first human cell to survive and multiply indefinitely in a laboratory settings. This immortal cell have since fueled countless medical breakthroughs, from the development of polio vaccine to investment in gene mapping, transforming Henrietta into a writing hero of science whose story continues to provide essential conversation about racial equity and informed consent in healthcare. That's all.
Okay, so for the key historical events, starting with 1951, Henrietta Lake was diagnosed with cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. During her treatment, cancer cells were taken from her tumor without her informed consent. These cells were later successfully cultured by Dr. George Gray, creating the first immortal human cell line known as HeLa. Because these cells could divide endlessly, they were mass-produced and distributed to laboratories worldwide, making a major breakthrough in medical research. By the 1970s, HeLa cells were widely used in research fields such as cancer studies, virology, genetics, radiation research, and drug testing. Around this time, Henrietta Lake's identity became publicly known, which sparked ethical debates about patient consent, privacy, and human rights in medical research. In 2010, the book The Immortal Life on Henrietta Lake by Rebecca Skloot was published. The book brought global attention to Henrietta's story and helped the public understand both the scientific importance of HeLa cells and ethical issues surrounding their use. And finally, in 2013, an agreement was reached that granted the Lake family limited control over access to HeLa genetic data, representing an important step toward respecting patients' rights and ethical responsibility in science. That's all.
So in this slide, we'll discuss about ethical dilemma and analyze them through different moratory. So the main ethical dilemma here that Henrietta's light cell was taken without her informed consent. So it raises an ethical equation that it is right for the scientist to prioritize medical advancement, our patient right to make decision about her own body. So based on utilitarianism, this action is considered ethical because utilitarianism is a moral theory that give the that produce the best action that produce the greatest happiness. So from this case, Harita like cells benefits millions of people. Like her cell was used to make a polio vaccines and also help the doctor to studies about the cancer growth. So that they can produce their patient with the best treatments. So from utilitarianism, we can say that they focus more on outcome rather than human rights. So in contrast, deontology focus on rules and human principle rather than outcomes. From deontology perspective, this action considered morally wrong because how beneficial her cell was, she has right to make decision about her own body. Based on current principle, it's already stated that we should not use other people to achieve our own goals. Instead, we should always respect their autonomy and dignity. That's all.
Okay, moving on to the next ethical dilemmas and issues analyzed through applicable moral theories. So the ethical dilemmas is commercialization and lack of compensation. As Alia said before, that Henrietta Lacks was taken without her consent, and Henrietta Lacks and her family received no financial compensation and struggle with poverty. This because the cells were later commercialized and used worldwide in medical research, and her family did not receive any payment or benefits. So this highlight with the utilitarianism, which is commercialization of HeLa cells led to medical advancement, which is polio vaccines, gene mapping that save or improve lives outweighs the harms and financial injustice that suffered by one family. That this highlight that it justifies injustice, ignoring the suffering of Henrietta and her family. Second is care ethics. So everyone know that care ethics emphasize empathy, responsibility, and relationships. However, the institution represents a massive failure of care by prioritize commercial gain over the welfare and respect owed to Lex and her family. Care ethics demands a mechanism for sharing immense profits with the Lex family to address their financial hardship, the historic injustice, thereby demonstrating the convention. So this case show how scientific progress can conflict with human rights, highlighting the need for ethical responsibility in medical research. That's all from me.
Now moving on to the last ethical dilemmas, which is genetic privacy and data spillover, whereby in the 2013 Henrietta's DNA is shared after her death. This causes her genetic blueprint automatically expose the private health risk of her children and the grandchild. Next, moving on to the deontological perspective, whereby publishing the genome without family consent is a breach of duty because it treats the family's private health information as a public tool for research rather than respecting for their rights to secrecy. From a deontological standpoint, taking or sharing biological data without consent is fundamentally wrong. Next, moving on to the utilitarian perspective, whereby utilitarianism evaluates morality based on the greatest good for the greatest number. Since HeLa is the gold standard for research, having the full genetic sequence will allow thousands of labs to ensure their experiments are accurate. So this data accelerates the creation of life-saving drugs. Thus, from this, billions of people globally benefit from faster cancer treatments, vaccines, and genetic therapies. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, next we move to the consequences. So first, science and research. HeLa cells allow continuous research on human cells without taking new samples from patients. They contributed to major breakthroughs such as the polio vaccine and cancer research, greatly accelerating medical and cell biology discoveries. And next for the ethical and legal. However, the cells were taken without consent. This raised ethical concerns and lead to stricter research standards. Today, informed consent and bioethic law are required in medical research. For the family impact, Heritage family was unaware of the use of the hair cell for decades. This caused emotional harm and loss of trust, and the family received no financial benefit despite global use of the cell. And then lastly, for the societal impact, her case became a landmark in bioethics, reminding us that scientific progress must always respect human rights. So that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, now I will talk about the laws that has been made today that are related to this case. So the first law is informed consent law. In 1951, Henrietta Lacks cancer cells were taken without her knowledge or permission. But today, the common rule requires doctors and research to clearly explain what the research is for and get written consent from the patient. And this means patient can agree, refuse, or ask question first, which is something Henrietta never had the chance to do. And the second is Institutional Review Board IRB regulation. So at the time Henrietta's cells were taken, there was no ethics committee to review the research. But now, all the research must be approved by the Institutional Review Board or IRB. And the IRB checks whether the research is ethical and whether the rights of the patients are protected, and not just whether the research is successful. The third is Patient Privacy Law or HIPAA. So for many years, Henrietta Lacks names and medical details were shared publicly. So HIPAA now protects patient privacy and controls who can access to the medical records. And this helps prevent families from being exposed or harmed in the way that the Lex family was. The fourth one is genetic data protection. So scientists once published the HeLa cell genome without consulting the Lex family. But now there is the NIH and Lex family agreement that limits the access to the HeLa genetic data and includes the family oversight. And this is important because genetic information doesn't just affect one person but also affect their relatives. And the last one is tissue ownership and bioethics law. So Henrietta cells were used worldwide and generate profit, but her family received nothing. And even though the tissue ownership law are still unclear, ethical standard today focus more on fairness and transparency. And the HeLa case made people question whether it is right to profit from the human tissue without considering the patient or their family. That's all from me.
I would like to continue next. Today we are looking at the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. In 1951, cells were taken without a consent or knowledge. Those cells, known as HeLa, became the first immortal human cell line, leading to polio vaccination, gene mapping, and even COVID-19 treatments. While a cells changed the world, a story changed our laws. Look at the 5 major reforms resulted from this case. First of all, informed consent. Before this, in Henrietta's time, if a doctor removed tissue during surgery, they considered it waste in terms of waste. And they could use it for any kind of research without saying a word to the or getting a consent from the patient. Today, that is completely illegal because reform like the common rule, doctor must obtain explicit written consent. You have the right to know where your cell is being used and what for is being used. Second is tissue ownership or profit. Historically, once a cell is left your body, it was treated like a property of the hospital. So they will do whatever they want. Any kind of profit they get was received for them. For this Henrietta Lacks case, the doctor profited from the cell that was originated from HeLa cell. And now legal status remain complex, but ethical scrutiny is high. Benefit sharing is now on demand because where the family contributors are included in the conversation, in some cases provide with legal settlements. It's so ironic that the person who contributed a cell and a family was there for a long time even without a health insurance, but somehow the same family was saving an entire population of the globally. She was some savior who was saving a lot of life. Third is patient and or family's privacy. 4 years, Lex family's medical and Entrita's genetic medical were exposed to the publics. Today's laws like HIPPA ensure that your medical identity is locked down. We even have specific agreements today that limit who has access to Henrietta's specific genomic sequence to protect descendants. Moreover, in terms of institutional override, we no longer rely on a single doctor's conscience to decide what's right or wrong. every piece of research today must pass through an institutional review board, which make sure the experiment or research was conducted in ethical way, ensuring the patient's risk never outweigh the benefits. The last is naming or cell tissue. This is actually an exposure of identity. Not everyone wants to their, even though they want to contribute to the world, not everyone wants their identity to be exposed. For example, people who have AIDS, if they want to give their cells, but I think due to the high strong stigmas in the society, they don't want the people to know them have a AIDS, even though it's not uh, maybe it's not due to their own behavior issue. The name Hela itself is a reminder of the old way, using the first two letters of the patient's name and the last two letters of the first two letters of the patient's first and last name. Modern science has replaced name with de-identified code numbers, like it's going to be called in the numbers um, like our courses are named BGY3005 kind of like. This ensures that while the science progresses, the patient's identity remains private.
So, from this re- apa, from this presentation, we have three reflections: the inherent value of individual, the burden of historical injustice, and the evolution of consent. Like deontology reminds us that individual must never be treated merely as an ends, regardless of how much utility or scientific progress they contribute, their contribution provide. And then the Hila case also reflects a time racial segregation where black patients had limited access to healthcare and fewer rights, emphasizing that bioethics cannot be separate from social and racial justice. Um, and then we also have two lessons here. Trans- Transparency in non-negotiable, where modern research require clear, written informed consent, and patient must know how much their data and tissue will be used in the future. And next, the burden of historical injustice, as shown by the 2013 2013 HeLa Genome Leak. Genetic information is not just personal, it is familial. Bioethics must evolve to protect the genetic blueprints of entire families. So the question is, if you sell created $1 billion drugs, should you get a share of profit, or it is just helping humanity is enough? And the second question is, would you sacrifice your family genetics, genetic privacy, if it means curing cancer for everyone else? So that's all from us. Thank you.